Previously on Rock Solid Finances.
Here is the foundational biblical principle that we find in the Bible. Nothing in my possession is mine. God owns it all. I'm God's money manager. As managers of God's money, a steward invests a portion of what God's given them and what God cares about most. How do we put His kingdom first with our finances? Well, this is where tithing is the starting point. So how do we manage that other 90% for God and really do it effectively? Well, it starts with principle number 2 for rock solid finances, which is this. A steward has a plan for how they're going to use money that isn't their own. Now, principle number 3 to having rock solid finances is a steward saves a portion of what God gives them to manage. Your number one priority in saving money is to at least have an emergency fund of $1,000. Now, you need to do that before you do anything else. And once you have that emergency fund set, then what you want to start doing is saving 10% of your income for retirement. Every time you get paid, simply set 10% aside in a retirement account. You know, we shouldn't talk about saving without talking about debt. And principle number 4 says, a steward avoids debt because it's slavery. Now, why would I call debt slavery? Because that's exactly what the Bible calls it. Proverbs 22:7 says, the borrower is servant to the lender. In other words, every time you have to borrow money to pay for something, you become a servant to that lender. You lose a piece of your freedom. And if you are currently or have been in a lot of debt before, you get this. Now, what is debt in the first place? Well, the dictionary would say this. It's money or property that you are obligated to pay another. But the reality of debt is, it's having something you can't afford that you have to repay. Can I ask you what's going to sound like a really dumb question, but one that I think we have to wrestle with and understand if we're going to see why the Bible calls debt slavery? Why would someone provide you the ability through their company to purchase something that you can't afford on your own? I mean, why would a car dealership give you a car that you can't really afford right now in cash and allow you to pay them back over time? Or why would a credit card company give you the ability to purchase anything you want with their money and never encourage you to pay them back right away? The answer is simple. You know this intuitively. It's because they are getting loaded doing it. And in the process, you are becoming their servant and losing your freedom to them. The last time I looked, Visa, the credit card company, had revenue of over $11 billion and earnings of $3.7 billion. They aren't making a product. They're not producing a widget. They're simply selling debt. That's the only product they have. And their earnings are that large. I once heard that there's really only 2 kinds of people in the world. One, those who pay interest, and secondly, those who earn interest. And if you pay interest your whole life, it's going to lead to poverty. As you saw in the savings example, if you're a person intent on earning interest and making compound interest work for you, man, it leads to a life of freedom and blessing. And God made it clear in the Bible which type of person He wants you to be. As a matter of fact, the Bible says 2 very specific things about debt, and they're found in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, we see God instructing the nation of Israel about what would happen regarding debt if they obeyed His commands and what would happen if they disobeyed. You see, the nation of Israel had a pretty rocky history. At times they obeyed God, and at times they didn't. And God had a command for them, or just a principle for them about what would happen when they obeyed and what would happen if they didn't regarding debt. You see, God said being able to lend, not going into debt, but being able to lend to others was a blessing. He says that in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 1 and 2, and then in verse 12. He says this, if you fully obey the Lord your God by keeping all the commands I'm giving you today, the Lord your God will exalt you above all the nations of the world. You will lend to many nations, but you will never need to borrow from them. So lending was a blessing for Israel's obedience. But then God goes on to say that debt is an actual curse. In other words, when you don't follow my commands, you're actually going to go into debt. Actually, he says this in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 15 and 44. God says this, "But if you refuse to listen to the Lord your God, the foreigners will lend money to you, not you to them. They will be the head, you will be the tail." That's how he refers to debt. Now, in America right now, are we a nation that is able to lend to others, or are we borrowing from others to pay our bills? You know the answer. We are a nation that is having to borrow to pay our own bills. And I think God wants to turn our nation around. But it doesn't start with the government. A lot of us want to blame the government. Well, they're messed up because they have to borrow. It doesn't start with the government. It starts with us. It starts with individuals understanding this principle and how we approach debt. Now, there's a prevailing thought out there that there's two kinds of debt. There's good debt, and then there's bad debt. Now, here's a definition of good debt that most people use. Good debt is going into debt on an appreciating asset. In other words, going into debt for something that's going to go up in value. The biggest example of this is a house or maybe a student loan. But bad debt is going into debt on a depreciating asset. In other words, anything that will go down in value after you purchase it. This includes all consumer debt, credit card debt, a vehicle, which, by the way, if you buy a new car, it goes down about 20% in value the moment you drive it off the lot. Now, there are many opinions about if you should go into good debt. Most people have always thought, well, a house will always go up in value. It's always going to be appreciating. Well, we know that isn't always true. Now, there are no opinions on if you should go into bad debt. You should never, and I mean never, go into debt for something that will go down in value. I believe you should never go into consumer debt. When it comes to good debt, a reasonable mortgage is okay. Many of us have that. But our goal in life should still be to become completely debt-free. Let me show you what our attitude towards debt has become in America. Watch this.
I think credit cards can be useful in the sense that a lot of people today don't have a savings. So if an emergency comes up, they don't have a savings account that they can dip into. So I think credit cards are a good option for people to have some money aside if there's a death in the family and they have to take a flight or some other emergency comes up.
Credit cards are cool because you can buy what you want without actually having to have the money, and then, it gives you that time to pay it back. So you get something cool and you don't have to pay for it right away.
My first credit card, I think. I'd never had one before, was real excited. We'll just hand this around, don't need any cash.
I've seen a bunch of my friends go through paying credit cards off with other credit cards, and I don't want to get myself into that kind of mess. So I think it's a big issue, though. Our country spends, look at our government, our country spends billions that we don't have, and we just borrow more and pay it off. And it's a vicious cycle, and it's going to hurt us in the long run.
Yeah, the ideal number on credit cards would be not more than you could pay off each month. Is that realistic for every family? I'd hate to say that without understanding what their deal is.
Credit cards are a part of life. I mean, everybody has to have them. You got to rent a car or a hotel room. It's just one of those necessary evils.
I used to have a lot of debt, but I've been paying it off. I think I only have like $3,000 or $4,000 left.
Not very much.
$1,500, maybe $1,000 at the most.
500.
Yeah, her probably
like,
less.
Yeah.
About $6,000. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, I think that's manageable. I think, if you don't have any kind of credit card debt, you're not an American, right?
Yeah, I think it's not a big deal. I mean, as long as you're making your minimum payments, of course. You get behind, that's not a good thing, but, it's pay a little extra on the months that you can, and I mean, that's how they set it up. It takes a while to pay them off, but if you don't get out of hand, it's not a big deal.
We have such a casual attitude towards debt in America. And I want to show you why I believe that God wants to radically transform that attitude for all of us and get us out of this slavery called debt. And I want to do that by looking at the person in that video who said this.
About $6,000. It's not a big deal.
No big deal, really? That's a number that most people would consider a safe amount of debt. And it's well under the national average for consumer debt in the United States. $6,000 may not seem like a lot, and yet God would beg to differ. Romans 13:8 says this. He says, this is what our goal should be. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. That's our goal, to become completely debt-free. And you might push back. You might say, come on, Ashley, $6,000 isn't really a lot. Is God a killjoy? Are you a killjoy, Ashley? Well, let's take a look at why God says what he does regarding debt. Let's say you owed Visa $6,000. And typical interest rate on a credit card is around 18%. That's really not uncommon these days. Well, here's how the math works on that level of debt. You see, Visa never wants you to pay this debt back right away. As a matter of fact, they would love you to delay paying it off as long as possible, because the longer you do that, the more interest they earn. And we've already learned that compound interest is a powerful factor that will work for them. So when you get your bill in the mail, all Visa asks for is a minimum payment. And your minimum payment is usually just a percentage of what you owe. Paying 2% is usually a typical minimum payment. So in this example, 2% of $6,000 is $120. So your first bill that comes in the mail from Visa would be $120. And you're thinking, wow, that's not a big deal. They lent me $6,000 and they aren't even asking me to pay it all back right now. They're only asking me to pay a portion, $120. So you just pay the minimum payment. But what you don't realize is that most of that $120 that you paid Visa actually goes towards interest that they're charging you and not towards the $6,000 you owe. Then you're blown away. The next month you get your bill and you can't believe it. Visa sends you a bill for even less than the month before. It was $120 the first month. The second month, it's going to be around $119.40, even less. And the reason is because you've paid a little bit of that $6,000 you owe, so your minimum payment goes down. Aren't they nice? I mean, these guys are your friends. You've seen the commercials. They're just in it for you. Now, month 3, your minimum payment goes down even more. It might go to $118.80. And month 4, now it's only $118.20. Now, if you took Visa up on their generous offer to just pay your minimum monthly payment every single month, let me ask you, how long do you think it would take you in years to pay back this $6,000 that you've borrowed? Yell out some answers right now, and I want to see if anybody can guess the exact amount of time. Well, the answer is, embrace yourself. It would take you 42 plus years to pay back that $6,000 that you borrowed. It's no big deal. Yes, it is. And in the process of those 42 years, in addition to paying back the $6,000, you would have paid Visa over $16,400 in interest. Now, do you see why the Bible calls debt slavery? But I want you to know there is hope. And today, I want to give you a proven system to get out of debt and to stay out of debt forever. It's a 5-step process that anyone can follow regardless of how much debt you have. How do you get out of debt? It's these 5 steps. Step 1, first, you have to commit to stop borrowing more money. You have to commit, I will not go into any more debt. Now that may sound like an obvious step, but I promise you it isn't. You can work really, really hard to get out of your current debt, but if you keep continuing to go into more debt, what's the point? And the problem with many of us is we've gotten so used to using debt that it's going to take some big commitments on our part to stop going into any more. And for some of you, it's going to take some drastic steps. Listen, if you have a credit card and you ever miss paying off that credit card at the end of the month, you have a problem and you should get rid of that credit card. Cut it up, freeze it in water, and put it in your freezer so you don't have the ability of making impulse decisions. Whatever you need to do, you need to stop using your credit card. Some of you need to find an accountability partner that will commit to asking you whether you're going into any more debt, so you have some real life accountability. You know, just being honest with someone close to you and with yourself, that can go a long way towards getting out of debt. Because in the real world, let's be honest, we're not always that truthful.
Hey man, you wanna play another 9 holes so we feel more like real men?
Sure. I mean, that sounds horrible, but I don't want you to think I'm weak, so definitely.
Yeah, I'm actually exhausted myself, but you look like you're really enjoying yourself, so I wanted to pretend like I was too.
Yeah, no, I'd actually much rather be at home watching TV. But, I mean, you know, what are you gonna do, right?
Yeah, so do you like an interlocking grip, an overlapping grip, or a baseball grip when you play?
Yeah, I actually don't know what that means. So speaking about buying things, I'm gonna use this rather weak segue to let you know about the new truck I just bought. Yeah, I'm gonna brag about it to you so you think that I'm cool.
Nice. I'll play along and act like I care. What kind of truck is it?
Oh, it's a brand new super heavy duty Pro X3000 Limited. I mean, the thing's lifted, it's fast, I can't even come close to making the payments on it. But you know, it's totally worth it because I think I look pretty cool driving it.
I'm gonna say out loud how amazing I think that is, but I'm actually insanely jealous. So I'm just like reeling, trying to figure out what to say to, you know, keep up with you. I got it. I'm gonna put in a new pool at my house with a grotto. Now's not the right time. I cannot afford it, but because you said the thing about the truck, I mean, I'm gonna pull the trigger because I gotta keep up.
Oh man. I mean, your story is really interesting, but I still think mine's better because I actually have the truck. But because of this, I'm definitely gonna go out and get another big screen TV, you know, just to stay ahead.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how easy it is to spend money you don't have?
I know, right? And the tragic thing is it doesn't even make me feel any better. At all.
Seriously, I mean, I'm up to my eyeballs in debt and I'm miserable, but people think I'm rich because of all the stuff I have.
It's so much easier if I just buy things to make it look like I've got it all put together than actually putting it all together and sticking to a budget or something.
Yeah.
I'm nuts.
Yeah, I know for certain that I would be a happier person if I just saved money, but spending money is such a blast.
Hey, you want to go to the pro shop and buy some of those new air wicking shirts they have?
Absolutely not. If we buy the shirts from there, they're going to be way more expensive, and they might not even have the ones we want.
Okay. Do you want to do it anyway?
Yes.
Yes!
Okay, so things will probably never get that out of hand for you, but let's just remember, the very first thing you need to do is to commit in a real way to not going in any more debt from this point forward. Otherwise, steps 2 through 5, they don't matter. Step 2 is this. You're gonna list all your debts from smallest to largest. And we provided a form that you can use, but what you need to do is take an honest inventory of every single one of your debts and list them from smallest to largest. After you've done that, step 3 is this. You're gonna focus all your attention on the very first debt you listed, the smallest debt. Now, it's not your biggest debt, not the one you personally want to pay off first. It's not even the one with the highest interest rate. It's simply your smallest debt, the smallest amount of money that you owe someone. But some of you are going to want to push back hard. You're going to say, but Ashley, we need to pay off the highest interest rate first because mathematically, that's what makes the most sense. You see, I'm telling you, debt is not just all math. Debt is more psychological than you think. And I think to really get out of debt, you need 2 things early on. One is you need some focus. You need to just focus in on one debt because that allows you to get some early wins. If you can pay off a debt really early on, psychologically, that's one of the greatest things to keep you going on your get out of debt plan. So step 3 is you're gonna pay the minimum payment. You will pay the minimum payment on all of your debts except the smallest debt. That's the one you're gonna focus on. And that leads to step 4. Step 4 is you're gonna demolish your smallest debt. Now, I didn't say you're gonna try and pay it off. I use the term demolish because when you realize how deeply debt enslaves you, it should get you mad. And you need what Dave Ramsey calls gazelle-like intensity on that smallest debt you're trying to pay off. Have you ever seen a gazelle run from a lion? I mean, it is intense. And that's the picture you need on how intense you need to be on paying off your smallest debt. So at a bare minimum, you're gonna fix your monthly payments. For example, when you look at that $6,000 debt, if you can pay $120 towards that debt this month, and next month you get a bill for $119, the next month is less, don't do that. If you can pay $120 this month, pay $120 every month. And by just fixing your payment where it's the same every single month, you can cut your payoff on $6,000, listen to this, from 42 years to less than 8 years. That's unbelievable, and that's just by fixing your payments. And instead of paying $16,000 in interest, now you're paying just $5,000. But I want you to demolish your debt, and this means doing more than just fixing your monthly payment. You need to find as much money as you can to pay this debt off faster. Let me give you some examples and some options. This will help. Look, some of you know you need to cut some areas in your budget that are discretionary and not really critical. Some of you need to cut cable for a while. You might say, but Ashley, I can't go without ESPN. I'm a man, that's a critical expense. Or some of you ladies think you can't do without HGTV, but your future depends on you getting out of debt. So yes, you can. Some of you need to sell some items that you own and use it to pay off debt. I mean, get radical. Some of you need to sell a car and downsize. Some of you need to sell a boat or an ATV. You may need to get a second job for a while and use that extra income to pay off debt. Some of you are in enough debt that you need to get so radical, you need to sell your home and downsize your house just to pay off debt. You may need to cut your entertainment budget. You may need to stop eating out for periods of time. The key is find extra money to pay off your debt faster so you can demolish it. Is it going to be painful for a little while? Yes. But is the freedom worth every moment of momentary pain? I promise you it is. I know this from experience. When my wife and I were getting out of debt, we gave up cable for many, many years. And I promise you, we had more peanut butter and jelly sandwiches than I would ever like to admit. So the key is you have to get radical to demolish debt. Let me show you how powerful this is. Taking your payment on a $6,000 debt from $120 a month to, let's say you found $80 more in your budget and you increased how much you paid each month from $120 to $200 a month, that cuts your payoff on that debt from 8 years to now just over 3 years. And you're only paying $2,000 in interest. From 42 years to 8 years to 3 years, that sounds more like it. But it takes getting radical so you can get out of debt faster. And that leads us to the last step, step 5. When you've paid off that smallest debt, when you've got radical and you've just got through all of it and you've paid it off, what you're gonna do is you're gonna roll the amount that you're paying towards that smallest debt to your next smallest debt. Now this is where things get exciting because you're gonna be doing what Dave Ramsey calls the debt snowball. Now with that list of debts we had before, now you get to roll that additional $200 and apply that to the $160 you were paying towards that $8,000 that you owed MasterCard. And with this additional payment, you're now paying $360 a month, and you'll be able to pay off this debt in just a short 2 years. Now, once you've paid that off, you get to take that $360 and apply it towards your auto loan of $15,000. And I'm telling you, that's paid off in no time. And as you use this debt snowball, before you know it, you can be completely debt-free. I know hundreds of people that have used this plan and they were able to get out of debt in record amounts of time. I know people that have been hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and they've paid it all off in 10 years. So no matter what your situation, I'm just telling you, there's hope. But you have to follow these 5 steps. Again, step 1, you have to commit to not going into any more debt. 2, you have to list all your debts from smallest to largest. 3, you have to focus on paying your smallest debt first. And 4, you don't just want to pay it, you want to demolish that smallest debt by intensely paying as much as possible by finding any extra money that you can. And lastly, once you pay your smallest debt, roll that payment to your next debt to start your debt snowball plan.
Principle number 4, a steward avoids debt because it's slavery. Look, no one wants to have the burden of debt. In this session, we learned the strategy of paying off smaller debts first so that we can experience psychological victories right from the outset. Chances are you probably have some people in the group who have experienced a victory of paying off a debt in their life. Credit card, student loan, car, maybe even a mortgage. Take a moment and share a time when you were able to get out of debt and some sacrifices that you had to make to get to that victory. Go ahead and hit pause. Then after you've had time to share, your group leader will continue the discussion before we hear Ashley's conclusion to this session. Take some time to discuss, then press play when you're ready to conclude the session.
One of my favorite stories from history took place during the Crusades that took place during the 11th through 13th centuries. During that time, soldiers and mercenaries who were going to participate and fight in the Crusades were actually required to be baptized. But because many of these soldiers came from far-off lands and from other areas, when they went to war, they hadn't been baptized. So as they were getting baptized, they did something that would seem very odd. They would take their swords, and as they were being baptized, they would hold their swords out of the water. In essence, they were telling God, I'm going to surrender everything to you, all control of my life, but you can't have my sword. I'm the one in control of this, and I'll do what I want with this. Now, I think for so many of us that are Christians, we really do want to give our whole lives to Jesus. We want to follow and trust Him in every way. And so when we got baptized, that was our symbol of us dying to ourselves and saying, I'm tired of doing things my way, I'm dying to myself, and I'm going to live now for you, Jesus. But just like those soldiers during the Crusades, I think for many of us, we hold back. We tell God, God, you can have control, and I want to give every area of my life to you, but we take our wallets and we hold them out of the water and we say, but not this one. I want to do this my way. And what I want to challenge you with today is, will you give God control of your finances and do things according to His plan in the Bible? I know that we've covered a lot today, but I believe the foundation we talked about early on of understanding God's ownership over all that we have is the foundation you need to have rock-solid finances. And what I want to do is I just want to leave you with the 4 principles we covered, but I want to give them to you in priority order. Because I know many of you may be feeling overwhelmed and just saying, where do I actually start? What's the first thing I should do from everything that we've covered today? Well, here it is very clearly. Your number 1 priority from this class, if you're not currently doing it, is to tithe. So right now, if you're not currently bringing back to God the first 10% of your income, that's the most important thing you could do coming out of this class. It's absolutely your number 1 priority. It wouldn't be putting together a budget or saving more money or putting together a great get-out-of-debt plan. Your number 1 priority from this class would be trusting God in your finances by honoring Him with the first 10% of everything He gives you. And the reason I want to reiterate that point is because if you're not tithing, God has no way of blessing your finances. And I know no better way to help your financial picture than to invite God to help you. And you can't invite God's help unless you're trusting His way of handling your finances. I've heard it said before, you can't expect the blessings of God unless you're following the principles of God. And without God involved in your finances, no budget, no savings, no get-out-of-debt plan is really going to work. So I'm begging you to trust God first. I've seen God fix more people's finances by taking this step than any other piece of financial advice I could ever give you. Now, after tithing, your next priority of everything we've talked about is to put together a budget. You can't take any of the other steps until you've actually put together a plan to manage the money that God's entrusted to you. So that's your second priority. Your third priority is to put together an emergency fund. Don't even start a debt payoff plan until you have at least $1,000 saved. So if you haven't done that yet, that's your third step after tithing and putting together a budget. And fourth, your last step is putting together a debt payoff plan based on the debt snowball that we talked about. It's in that priority order that you need to work. Tithe, budget, emergency fund, and get out of debt. And for many of you today, what it's going to take to make that a reality is surrender. You have to surrender and say, I'm tired of doing it my way. That doesn't really work. God, I actually want to do it your way now. And when you do that, I can tell you from experience and from hundreds of life stories, you will have rock solid finances and never look back.